There's also a couple on the Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Questions, but I don't know if we can get to that. And we still have a couple of questions from the last few days.
At least one on Chitta yesterday.
Well, that one, as well as the one from the day before, two from the day before.
The Bhavatanha ones?
The one from Bhavatanha and the other about dependent origination, Tanha and Upadana.
Okay.
Those three.
They've been, those have been coming up, but if you want to address them again specifically, they're right here.
Yeah, I think maybe it's good to really go for.
We pass those on to the teacher Samuppada expert.
I think there's another question about Chitta that can be good grouped with this one. Okay. We'll feed you all the hard questions, okay? You want the Chitta ones too?
I think fear and
see. Do you want to start with previous questions, or what are the Zoom questions?
I haven't even looked at, to be honest.
Okay.
I haven't read them. I'm not entirely sure.
Maybe they could be combined, or you don't want to be too behind in questions.
Yeah, so I suggest doing the oldest one first.
Okay.
So we don't get too, oldest ones from there, because we said like the Zoom questions will be.
Were they on topic, or?
I haven't read them yet.
You just want to set them aside for now.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to start with old questions?
Yeah, so those.
Okay.
So
we'll just, I guess we'll keep an eye on the clock.
What is the difference between craving, tanha, and clinging, upadana, and why in this order? In Paticca Samuppada, like that, when this arises, that arises, so then this is the first tanha or craving arises, and then upadana or clinging arises. I just think of this in most simple terms. It's like I was describing with the clock. Like I see the clock as sense contact, and then based on that contact, I like this. So then there's that craving that arises. I want this, and then the clinging is, and I would sort of pick it up. And then just hold on to it. And I feel, I suppose one of the things that's often mentioned that in the chain of dependent origination, this is one of the places where one can sort of cut the chain, because that craving as it arises, in consciousness, if one can just stay with it and in awareness, and then before the clinging, some people say all this happens in just instantaneously, so then and then some people say it happens over time. So it's I suppose in practical terms, I found that formulation helpful, that this is one of the places we can call that sort of dependent origination. So then the grasping or clinging, before that happens, if one is just able to stay with that feeling of craving, then in a sense there's the rest of the leading to old age, sickness, and death, the suffering, etc., doesn't necessarily need to follow. Those are some thoughts. Difference between craving and clinging.
Yeah, kind of like in the Cuenca tradition, you're focusing a lot also on the feelings, and like I was saying this morning, there's like the feelings come up with your experiencing due to your experience, and then due to that feeling, you get some kind of craving, which can also be it's like it's not like wanting something, it's also the pushing things away because that's like two sides of the same coin, and not wanting things and the wanting things. And you if you're not aware of this process happening, you have like an automatic reaction, and that automatic reaction is like is well, literally uptaking upadana, and uh, so that's why the one is in the order in that order, because you first get this feeling and you get this craving for more of that feeling or pushing that feeling away because I don't want this feeling because it's a negative feeling that I don't like. And then automatic reaction that comes after that. But that automatic reaction doesn't have to be so automatic. It's only when we become mindful of it that we can see this point and not react. We can stop that there. So yeah, there's a little bit of a different way of describing the same thing as Ajahn already said.
Yeah, there's many dimensions to it. First of all, the three of us, perhaps we will not provide a completely comprehensive or satisfactory answer to questions like these. It often does take not just like theoretical or reading scriptures or even intellectual contemplation. A lot of the more, real meaning is going to come through us making observations in our own practice about how craving arises and what clinging is and that kind of a thing. Other two, very good scholars have written extensively on it. One, Bhikkhu Analia, written extensively on craving and clinging. If anyone wants to go deeper into more specific scholarship about it, also Thanissaro Bhikkhu has written extensively on it, like in The Shape of Suffering. And so, yeah, right, craving. So, I mean, how academically correct definitions are, or what one just like feels it into it for oneself. I mean, we do notice, like, I always thought of upadana or clinging more as like identity structures. And so why it's in this particular order, the way I heard it from this thing about identity structures, like that is in the first noble truth. You go through the whole list of the dukkha origination. The last one is, in brief, Sankitena Pancha Upadana Kanda Dukkha. In brief, these five aggregates that are the bases of identity. Some actually use that translation, or focus of identity, or basis for identity and clinging. That's where the kind of fundamental clinging is. And there's different suttas that support that, like Ananda, the sutta about his initial stream entry. He was being taught by Punyo, and he just received the teaching that it's by clinging to form that asmi, arises, not through not clinging. So anyway, there's just good evidence that the clinging or upadana often does come up in the context of our identity. And indeed, that is one of the four upadanas, is the atta, or the attavada upadana. So that's one way to think about it. And it also has this nuance of fuel. But an interesting thing I heard from one of my first teachers was it's difficult to go at the upadana directly, actually, but the way to do it is through the craving, sort of undercutting the craving. And the simile that he used is it's like an ant on the ceiling. An ant will like pick up one one leg there, but it's still got the other 5. And I'll put that back and then pick up the other one, and it just stays stuck like that. So the thing to do is to at least focus on the craving. And also dependent origination, this is Ajahn Thanissaro's thing, has this what's called diachronic and synchronic. So it has like these dimensions of happening over time or happening, sort of simultaneously in the moment. And the thing about it is the craving, which is already coming up on contact and feeling, that already has the self-identity in it from the ignorance with conditioned, sankharas. So there's already a whole bunch of, conditionality happening. It's not like happening new every time like that. And there's some technical terms that refer to that. So, yeah, and one of the classic similes from the old commentaries is just the craving is the wanting, reaching out, and the grasping or the clinging is the holding on, like I mentioned. That's another nice way to think about the tanha, or the bhava tanha and the vibhava tanha, is just wanting and not wanting. We used to just use it like that in a very colloquial sense, a very practical sense, just to see those two energies of wanting and not wanting. Well, they're both tanha. They're both wanting. One is wanting not. So there's, just some practical ways to investigate that.
And then this one. So it says, Dear Ajahn Buddhisadhu, concerning your explanation of bhava tanha, my understanding of bhava tanha is that it not only is equals to the.
Would you like me to read it out?
Yeah.
Concerning explanation of bhava tanha, my understanding of bhava tanha is that it not just refers to the wish of a future existence, but also is the craving for being here and now, and the craving for being someone. I observe it as a deeply ingrained tendency of the being. By reaching at its impulses, we create, by reacting on its impulses, we create the cause for further existence. What do you think of this view, understanding? Thank you. When I had just mentioned bhava tanha briefly the other night, I wouldn't have said future existence. I would have said, existence in time. So, but do you want to comment on that?
Oh. Yeah, I suppose it could be both, but not as in. So I suppose this interpretation will be on a more profound existential level. That sort of inherent craving for existence, but then also on a more ordinary level, bhava tanha, it's like one sort of has perceives something as oneself not being something, and then that sort of craving to want to become that, want to for that becoming. Like I suppose, like becoming enlightened. I am an enlightened being, and I must practice really hard so that I can become enlightened in the future. So I suppose that I mention of time in that sense. But then also, of course, in the present, as the question says, one can also see it, but I feel that's more on a deeper, more existential level. Let me see. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. I mean, it also comes back to what John Buddhisara said earlier about the identity of the being just wanting to be something in this world, wanting to have an identity basically in this world. And I think also like briefly coming back to the previous question with Upadana, that always has to do with that identity, because if you're having a reaction like anger, for instance, there's underneath that there is this sense of me and mine, this sense of identity of this self-image, and I think that also has to do with the bhava tanha here in the same sense as it's described in the question.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean there is like nice nuances there that just inherent in the being itself is this kind of love of being or desire for being or desire for cherishing. Like when we said the other night, we said, the purpose of existence is the fulfillment of desire or something. The Buddha has several suttas where he's like, Chandamulika sabbe dhamma. Desire is the root of all things. So desire and, existence or manifestation seem to be part of the co-arising phenomena there. So bhava tanha does seem to be absolutely fundamental in the very creation of existence and a being's existence. I mean, those two are co-arising, by definition, but by nature. You don't get a being without a being in a world of becoming. And I prefer that language so much to the more like static or materialistic thing about like a realm of existence, because it is a co-creation event. So it's not really fair to say these realms exist outside of the beings that co-create them with their desire for becoming. But that might be considered a more subjective or existential interpretation, but it works. And so, yeah, also you do not get a being outside of time. That's why I'm not sure if this was, whatever I had said that first night to imply a future existence, I'm not sure. But I'd certainly be consistent about you do not get a being out of time. Even this thing about the present moment, desire for becoming in the present moment. Well, those are all going to be mental formations happening, and you don't get a mental formation outside of time. It's actually an event, it's an activity, it's a process. So that could just require some closer mindfulness and discernment to see the process and actually understand what impermanence is, what time is, or what change is in one's own mental fluctuations. Like Ajahn Santa had mentioned this thing about, do we really recognize what impermanence is that's happening right now? And granted, the aging, sickness, and death, and the sunrise and the sunset, that is a bit external. And they even call it sort of subjective anicca or internal anicca. They actually have a external anicca, dukkha, anatta, and sort of internal anicca, dukkha, anatta, or more subjective impermanence, non-self and suffering. And so that subjective impermanence, I mean, that is something that can be a surprise to one. This is why the emphasis on the now is actually a unique dimension, which is timeless, which is related to the chitta question, maybe. Things which are outside of the time, the present moment, or any mental activity is just not outside of time. Time and space are co-creation dimensions of sankhara, of a mind. You actually don't get them outside of a mind co-creating them. And that is also outlined in dependent origination, but partly cosmological, partly subjective, where the Buddha does go into some modeling of how our experience is being co-created. So that might be very new, or it might sound very metaphysical, but it's pretty consistent when one begins to contextualize these things with the suttas and also with one's own experience. So craving for being here and now, and the craving for being someone, yes, and as was mentioned, I will be enlightened in the future, or I want this, I don't want that. That's all a self in a world with this like wanting, not wanting, which has the time vector. Any wanting, not wanting needs like the vector to fulfill that wanting. It means there's something not right now, and it wants to manipulate circumstances to make it right. So one really can get some big insight in there, and that's the tanha element. That's also the bhava element of the self, and it's the upadana element of the whole, identity structure, creating that. So yeah, there's a lot of real deep contemplation and understanding to happen here, both seeing how it's presented in the early Buddhist teachings and also looking into one's subjective experience to see it actually happening. That's the thing about dependent origination. You can practice that. It's not just a pedagogical device or a map or a model. It's actually something we can see happening in our mind stream all the time, actually. Although Ajahn Chah had a funny simile, because scholars and philosophers would come to him and challenge him, touche with some of the academia, and he would say, "Oh yeah, dependent origination. It's a bit like when you fall out of a tree. You don't count the branches on the way down. All you know is that you hit the ground with a thud and it hurts." So the thing about like different steps, it might take some serious discernment to actually see it, like with contact as a condition, feeling as a condition, craving. But you actually you can learn to see it with definitely more refined mindfulness and discernment, and taking a keen interest in it, being really curious about how these things operate in one's mind. That's probably the main factor, is one has to be kind of keenly interested to understand, how's my heart and mind working to give rise to all this, and the craving and the dukkha especially. So
yeah, it's also saying like all there is really now, because the past is our memories in the now, right now. The future is also, it's not here yet, so it's also our ideas about the future right now, but we are creating that in the now all the time. And so yeah, that's just something I wanted to add to that.
oh, thank you, Sadhu. And Santa, lions roar on the now.
No, I think so.
Okay. Aya, will you read, before we go on to Chitta, will you read?
There's 2 Chitta questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chitta doubleheader tonight, double feature.
Okay. All right, I'll read this one, which I think is very beautiful and touching. The dear Venerable Vinvara, you trust me that I am making good choices for practice. You give me the benefit of the doubt. This gives me the same sense of peace that I receive from being with people who keep precepts. It makes me feel unjudged and safe. These gifts help me to grow, and the safety makes it easier to practice self-awareness without having to feel defensive. When I'm with people who do not trust me, how can I trust myself, or to trust that the Dhamma is working in me? And how can I trust others more in the same way, giving them the benefit of the doubt? I want them to feel the same safety. That's, I feel that very touching, and thank you very much for the person who wrote this. But yes, also the question of, especially I want to focus on, yes, feeling safe is quite often very important in practice. If you're somewhere in a room with, and I've especially came across this like years ago when I was teaching in, or I met a Dharma teacher from the Dharma punks who don't exist anymore, but they had like a group for people of color. And we don't have that in work so much. And I'm also not so much aware of the history of Black Americans and how that has impacted them and the trauma and so that might have given. So I spoke a lot with this teacher who focused a lot on creating safe spaces. And she says like, well, if you are for instance, a Black American, and you come into these meditation centers, which are primarily white people, and you just don't feel safe because of your whole conditioning. And of course, like after you practice long enough, then that's you can learn to overcome that and whatever. But that's why it's so important to create these safe spaces, feeling safe and unjudged and just okay to be there is just so important for everyone's practice on a lot of levels. And some of you know that I do a lot of things too for LGBTIQ plus people as well. So they're kind of the same thing. It's like you need to be able to feel safe in that environment where you're not being judged for who you are. So it's and yet after some time, after you've been practicing some time, you might feel just safe anywhere and it doesn't matter anymore. But just to start with, that's incredibly important. When I'm with people who do not trust me, how can I trust myself? Well, actually, that's one point where you come to at some point is where you trust yourself, and then it doesn't matter anymore what anybody else thinks or what you think that anybody else thinks, because you don't actually know what other people are thinking. Maybe they do trust you, maybe they don't, but you don't know. Maybe after, like if you spend some time with them, you get some idea of that, but still at some point you have to come to a point where you whatever anybody else says or does, or whatever praise or blame you're getting, it doesn't matter anymore, and you can just be true to yourself in all situations. And trusting that the Dhamma is working in me. Just look back, look at like how were you so many years ago? How has the Dhamma changed how you are now? Are you a more calmer person, kinder person, or have you grown in the good qualities or not? That's when you know that the Dhamma is working, if you grow in these good qualities. And that the more negative qualities, the desire, craving, etc., the anger, ill will, etc., have diminished a little bit. And it doesn't have to be big, but if you just see it like, oh yeah, something has changed in me, and this has really helped me. So then you know, when you get this faith in that the Dhamma is working, and that you're going the right way, and you can just trust in that rather than other people. To say, like, you don't focus so much on what other people might think or not think, but when but focus on how you yourself have developed in the Dhamma, and it's in the trust that you have built up in the Dhamma, and then you can I think it sort of automatically starts to work out, and also in your relationship with other people, in that sense. And when you give other people trust, they give trust back. So that's, and Adam, is there anything you want to add?
Sure. Sure, yeah, trust issues. Although I did come to appreciate that because, the Buddha said it is wise not to trust the untrustworthy. So, I mean, this thing about like trusting others, there is like a wise form of non-trust also. Like if someone's going to steal your phone or your travel bags or something like that, or just, it is an aggressor, then they're not trustworthy. I have made some very good points here about like, this is one reason I went out into the world seeking intentional community. Those who I did feel safe with, those who were like keeping precepts and communal agreements. I mean, that was all part of the exploration to find, higher integrity community and those who are seeking more sort of genuine fulfillment or whatever. So there's a lot of good issues there that can motivate us. And also, what does trustworthy mean? In just a very like classic kind of Buddha sense, it would be, those who, this question about purity yesterday, I mean, those who, is greed trustworthy? Well, actually, greed might always happen. It's something like, I am willing to manipulate or exploit others or be inconsiderate of the needs or well-being of others for the sake of my own gain. See, that could be an element of greed. So maybe if we have greed, or to what extent, that makes us not so trustworthy. And same with like anger. We're inconsiderate of others or willing to compromise their well-being for our own, whatever we want. So there's definitely some deeper dimensions there about what does it mean to be trustworthy. Also, this very good point about trusting oneself or feeling trustworthy, feeling others trust us or feeling trustworthy to others. I mean, those are pretty deep issues because this thing in our heart about loving and being loved is just so deep and existential. You can almost like find it there at the root of everything. Loving and being loved. And we even, in the Pali geek term is hiriotapa, we come into this world, we're not separate from each other, and we're born from parents and we grow up in society. So we care about what other people think. And this thing about feeling shame or blame or that kind of a feedback that we get from others is supernatural. And it is a part of our learning process. I mean, it's designed for us to learn as social creatures. I mean, it can have dysfunctions along the way, or we can not upgrade and mature as we ought to along the way. But so there's very special qualities of that and how we feel about others and wanting to be, wanting praise or wanting acceptance or wanting love or trust from others. So there's a lot there. It's not just a one-sided answer here, although it is the kind of a both and. All along the way, we will be wanting to learn how to trust ourselves. And we can do that bit by bit. Even this keeping precepts or having our conduct be free from remorse is a wonderful foundational way to begin to build self-esteem, self-confidence, self-trust, that I am acting in alignment, like with my values and my conscience. Here's where conscience or conscientiousness is just so important in everything, but especially how we're able to trust ourselves, how others find us trustworthy. The Buddha says of a Tathagata, it's a lion's roar of a Tathagata. So a Tathagata does, so they say. So they say, so they do. As in public, so in private. As in private, so in public. They're just ruthlessly consistent with their conduct. And they're trustworthy because of that. And they're free from greed, hatred and delusion. So there are not really, there should be not beings that are more trustworthy than that, because what's coming from them is not biased by the greed, the anger, or the delusion. So yeah, many, many good points and many more good points, but time is flying. But would you like to?
Yeah, it's this sort of gift potential we have to give that gift of trust, and I think primarily to oneself, and I feel that's such an important part of spiritual practice of giving oneself that gift of trust. And maybe as initially as an example, like like someone else one encounters some kind person, wise person who has been able to relate to us in that way, of giving, sort of empowering us to given us that gift of trust in us. Then that sort of, that in a sense, giving us permission to trust ourselves, to sort of put aside those self-doubts, those sort of habits of self-condemnation or self-judgment or doubts of trying to um, sort of find that feeling of safety, feeling of trust from someone else or from external circumstances, and then maybe in a sense looking for it in the wrong places, or it's not really, someone else cannot um, I suppose they can create that permission, but then something within us needs to, it's like when we experience that safety, then I suppose we can start to develop it further, so then it establishes itself more firmly, and then the waves of self-doubt, self-criticism can come, but then there's something else that it says, oh, I know you, it's just, these are just thoughts, I don't need to take them on. And then also in spiritual practice, trusting one's own experience. So then there's so many different teachers, different traditions, so then one can listen to various teachings, and then as one practices something, and then observing what is the result, what is one's own experience with that particular teaching, and then if it resonates, if it works, then one can follow it. But if something doesn't seem to work, doesn't seem to make sense, then one can really leave it aside. So trust also in that sense, trusting oneself and one's own experience.
Yeah, when I also like studied in Lenka tradition, there was a very strong sense of you have to do this technique, otherwise you do it wrong. And learning to trust your, like it took me quite some time to get over that, and to learn to trust, to look in myself and say like, oh, this is helpful and this is not helpful, and actually use that instead of what other people told me that I had to do. So yeah, in that sense, it's very important to be able to just practice, do your own practice, and see what is working for you. And we can only teach, but what you take from that, that is your own decision. That's your own. You can take from that and try it. And if it doesn't work, then well, you can either see like what's going on there, what's maybe talk to us and see why it doesn't work, or you can say, okay, we've tried this for some time and this is not my practice, and that's perfectly okay too. Yeah, everybody is different and everybody needs something different, and people also need something different at different stages of their lives. Sometimes different stages in the day. It's like if you have a lot of anger coming up, you might need to do metta practice. and not do vipassana or whatever practice you're doing. So it all depends on circumstances, and you can only be around judging that. But you need to learn to be around judge.
Yeah, in the tradition, we have this saying, trust in the Dharma, but it's very close to sort of follow your heart. Or this thing about when we do get like unconditional love from someone and they give us permission to, discover what's, true for us or what's good for us and to make mistakes. And so this thing about like follow your heart, and it's this trust in the Dharma or confidence or conviction or faith, however it may be, but that begins to show up more and more when this point about like developing the Dharma, for me, it just used to amaze me how this sounds kind of Buddhist, but what the Buddha said will happen, does happen. But I would say that like about my teachers too. They would say, do this, and I would do it. And what they said would happen did happen. And that was just amazing to me. And my, whatever I had trust or faith initially turned into confidence and conviction. And we do see it just becoming more like Dharma principles or Dharma activity just manifesting through our behavior when we come more in alignment with it. And we do see that it is like very, very reliable. Even reliable is a better word than trustworthy, because we know it's reliable and we can rely on it. Yeah, there's just a lot to say there. Yeah. Should we go on to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay. Chitta. Here was the question yesterday. According to my understanding, the term chitta is used when one refers to the faculty of the mind, heart, and reference to chitta nupassana and the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And the undefiled chitta is sometimes called original mind or pure mind in the Thai forest tradition. And nevertheless, also the undefiled chitta is impermanent. Is my understanding correct? I would say yes. Could you please explain the terms mana and ceto in relation to chitta? Again, good question. And so the question on chitta today is, Dear Venerable Ajahn Buddhisaro, as records the expression as regards the expression that chitta is nibbana. Oh, that's what I said yesterday. That wasn't exactly what we said yesterday. Isn't this a view which is very likely to make one slide into wrong view? And then number 2, how does this view go together with the Buddha's teaching, which says that also the chitta is conditioned and impermanent? So I guess that's a little bit related there. So a few points on chitta. Again, this point about like how much we can understand through reading and studying or intellectually, through contemplation, and how much direct experience is actually really required to understand some of these things at a deeper level. And chitta, the way it's used in the Thai forest tradition, is definitely one of those things. So a lot of these kind of questions that have to do with like higher Dhamma, like nibbana or anatta or emptiness or stream entry, we often do, get encouragement not to get too well, this didn't really work for me, so I shouldn't be saying it. But don't be overly infatuated by the intellectual contemplation, and definitely do lots of practice and set aside drawing conclusions about this. Like, what do they mean when they say chitta? Well, we want to have some very deep practice initially to be able even to approach that question. to understand it, It's hard for us to understand, something we haven't experienced. And they say that even more so about like the Dhamma. In fact, some of those are just said to be not comprehensible by, the lokia, the more mundane mind, even things like psychic powers or deep samadhi, but much more so lokuttara dhammas, like super, above the world attainments like that. So often when they're speaking about chitta, it has to do with those kinds of questions. So what we didn't say that chitta is nibbana. We said the quote from Ajahn Panya last night was, nibbana is our true nature. We know it by being it. And the pure chitta is nibbana. So we just want to be careful about that. You take something out of context. So nibbana is our true nature. Where is nibbana? Where could nibbana be? What is nibbana? See, we're talking about nibbana and views on nibbana. There's quite a bit of understanding here that may take some time to actually develop just a more refined understanding there. But we won't have time to go into it at that level. It might have to get set aside yet another day. But the kinds of things we do hear from our teachers are nibbana, or the unconditioned, is one aspect of our nature, and the conditioned is another aspect of our nature. Some of this it may make sense to one, and they may resonate with it, or they may not. And it's totally a legit thing to do. If some traditions have certain interpretations that we do resonate with, maybe that's what's calling us at this time. Other traditions might not. It just sounds misguided, or like wrong practice, or spooky, or something like that. And that's quite fine too. So some of it could have to do with what our particular karmic connection is, like with the Dharma and what's going to attract us. I mentioned when I first heard these teachings, when I first came, they just immediately resonated. Because I already had a more subjectivity approach to things, that even the knowing of emptiness, or the realization of Dhamma, or Nibbana, doesn't happen to no one or nothing. And so I already had a sort of a positive, a positivity bias that Nibbana would be reality, And the reality, what's reality relevant to, or what realizes Nibbana? That's why this thing about in the Arahant, formula of realizing Arahantship, the chitta is the thing which gets included, not mano, not vijnana, not mind, not consciousness. It's the chitta that gets freed, vimutti, liberated through non-clinging, because it's free from ignorance. So the chitta does seem to be the prominent one, not the mind, not the consciousness. So there's something special about the chitta. If that's the thing that gets liberated, that must be the thing which kind of contacts nibbana, or gets nibbana'd. If it's going to, if it were the mind, the most you can say is the mind gets freed from greed, hatred, and delusion. And that's often how it's presented from, traditional Theravadan interpretation of the Pali text. So when, the pure chitta is nibbana, that's an attempt to describe something. I mean, if one does read the island, all the, early Pali suttas, which are focused on nibbana, you'll find the Buddha, talking about nibbana in very poetic ways as well. It's the dimension where there is, no sun, no moon, and, no world, no this world or the next. The Buddha's talking about like that. So the way that, nibbana gets communicated or expressed can be kind of more poetic in some cases, and that the chitta is the thing. I mean, something must realize nibbana. I mean, what gets liberated or what is defiled? I mean, it's got to be something. It's not nothing. So, So is the chitta conditioned or impermanent? Sure, we do read that the chitta gets used in certain contexts where it does seem to be mind or consciousness, and we can consider that as impermanent and conditioned as we like. I prefer to use the term mind or mano or sankhara when I think of conditioning like that, and I do just save that term chitta for the special thing that seems to contact nibbana. But yeah, original mind and pure mind. Pure mind, pure chitta does mean the chitta which is free from greed. Lobha, dosa, and moha. That's the way the Thais use it. Original mind means like the chitta in fourth jhana or deep samadhi, like that, where it's the pabhasara chitta in the texts, just more like the samadhi chitta, which still has ignorance in it. So they do use those terms quite technically in the Thai tradition as well, and it is quite nuanced, and frankly, it does usually require either deeper samadhi to begin to understand what they're talking about, or deeper insight, deeper panya. But it's usually pretty clear. I mean, they like, as mentioned, they are considered, Thai forest tradition, heretical from the orthodoxy because of this thing chitta. But it sounds pretty clear from the critics that they are not aware of what the Thai teachers are talking about when they speak about chitta. It just sounds like they haven't experienced it, and they don't know what they're talking about. They're just criticizing it from an academic point of view. Honestly, it sounds like that. But also in other traditions, they understand nibbana to be a cessation where there is like no consciousness. And that does set sort of like, especially the Burmese tradition, quite in a different camp or in a different interpretation than, say, the Thai forest tradition. About emptiness and nothingness. But those are pretty refined points. But please come see me for an interview, and we can really discuss it and see where you're at with this thing about the chitta, because I think it's amazing. Ajahn Brahmali, who is a mentor to Aya, wrote a fine academic article called What Nibbana Is and What It Is Not, where he's also addressing this issue about mano, chitta, and vijnana. And also others have written on that topic. Johansson, even from back in the 70s or the 60s.
Ajahn Brahmali takes a different standpoint than you do now.
Than I do
now? Yes.
Oh, he's taking a different standpoint. Oh, yes, but I mean, he's discussing it if one wanted to see some of the suttas. But yes, he has a more traditional interpretation that chitta means consciousness or mind and is conditioned and impermanent. But Aya, would you like to rant on the conditioned and permanent chitta and the wrong view of the Thai forest masters?
Yeah, right.
Although we are over time, so
we are over time, but I think it's important to know that there are different opinions and different interpretations of this. And I remember reading in Ajahn Panya's biography that he once wrote an article, or translated an article or talk from his teacher Ajahn Mahabua, and sent it to the Buddhist Publishing Society, and it was refused on that grounds as well. So yeah, there are different opinions on this, and it's you know that Ajahn Brahm has a different, and also Bhikkhu Bodhi and Ajahn Brahmali have different opinion on that, and they usually take mano, vijnana, and chitta to be more or less synonyms, just used in different contexts in a slightly different way. The one thing that I find actually most interesting is that both traditions have the same view of what is an arahant, is where the chitta is has no more greed, hatred, and delusion, has been purified of that. So I think that's far more important for actual practice to focus on that, because that's our task of what to do, is to look at where this greed, hatred, and delusion lives within us, and to deal with that, and to come to eventually to get rid of that.
Yeah, that is a real like solid and reliable interpretation that can take one a long way. And then maybe how we understand things now could quite possibly change as our practice deepens. That's, we're teasing a little bit because it absolutely will. So that's a way that we can just, keep an open mind for now and not jump to conclusions or be too critical of the experience of others, and just see how our own practice develops and deepens so that we may be able to understand more what others say. However, did anyone hear the recent Bhikkhu Bodhi interview on the Wisdom podcast? I mean, Bhikkhu Bodhi's in a conundrum here because he wants to stay true to these wonderful, authentic texts, which he has translated. However, when he is, put on the spot, and he's been also living in the Mahayana, sort of communities for some time, he's really hesitant to say, okay, when the Arahant dies, there's nothing. So if it's mano vijnana, which realizes nibbana, and it's free from greed, anger and delusion, then what happens when the Arahant dies? Aya?
Well, the word nibbana in literally is used for things like a flame going out. So that would be what is happening then to the Arahant.
And so what's after? What's then? Nothing?
Yes.
Oh.
It's like the 10 questions, I suppose. Does the Arahant exist after death, not exist, both, and then the simile of the candle.
No, it's not the person that exists, doesn't exist. It's not a person that exists. Otherwise, you say it's the self that keeps on going on, and the self is
the 10 questions of someone, and then the answer is that the candle, it's like when it's extinguished, does it go to north, south? It's a long question.
It doesn't go anywhere.
Doesn't go anywhere.
It's not there anymore. The cue is gone. But there's I think there's this is inherent to the question of what is atta, and this whole concept of atta is simply shown to be an empty concept that doesn't exist.
And so what if there's a chitta with no I making or mind making? No sense of atta there? For example, we mentioned that the Buddha said, and presumably it applies to the Arahant, here and now, the Buddha or the Arahant is not to be reckoned. So our reckoning of the Arahant as the 5 khandhas that's either going to die or not going to die, continue forever after death, those are said to be wrong views, frankly. And also the Buddha, remember, he said in the Kachanagota Sutta, this thing about it exists or it doesn't exist. Those sankaras that are also coming from not having insight into dependent origination.
If you say the chitta exists after death, then or after the death of the Arahant, then you're also saying it exists. We get into the same thing, basically, same kind of argument.
Not really. It does not put nibbana in time, for starters. Something which is unconditioned can't come into existence or go out of it. So it's outside of time, I mean, by definition. But these are some of the explorations that happen. actually in discussions which are looking to sort of understand what Nibbana is, or what the kind of right view might be, even if it is a more intellectual view, or the debates that would happen were certainly like on this topic. But Nibbana, if it's outside of time, see, this is one of those things that just might not be comprehensible. And also the thing about having no I or me or mine be there, you don't have a view that this is my chitta. And chitta is just like emptiness, it's not a thing or a self that's enduring. So there are like some subtle points that get discussed in that kind of discussion about what chitta is. But if one only knows chitta as a phrase from the Pali, that's not going to be possible to go too deep into that discussion. One will have to go deep into one's own subjectivity and discover a dimension of subjectivity that is free from I and mine, and then have a discussion with the Thai forest master who says that this is the chitta which contacts Nibbana. And, it will be a different discussion, and it won't be about, time, and it won't be about what happens to the Arahant before or after death. And these are the discussions that that we have with our teachers, and that they share openly about their experience too. And sometimes they will say something that sounds idiosyncratic, or they don't have like these academic executioners or police standing over their heads waiting for them to say something which is wrong view that they can disprove in the Pali. They just don't have that. So sometimes they will say things that are maybe a bit loose, or casual or colloquial, and then the scholars will come in and want to execute with quotes. You've got wrong view. Here I'm quoting the scriptures. That looks very silly to them, actually, because they can see what's going on in their mind, and see that their practice isn't yet able to understand what they're talking about. I'm biased, obviously, but I'm also much more convinced that they know what Nibbana is than any of the academics I've heard. And the thing about Bhikkhu Bodhi, he flounders. You live streaming? Listen to the interview yourself. When he's being asked, so what happens, so the Arahant dies and then there's nothing? And Bhikkhu Bodhi's like, no, there's not nothing, but I can't say there's something, because that would be eternalist view. And listen to the interview. It's sad, actually, but it's also amusing to hear a scholar at odds with his own views. A revered, very revered scholar like that, who can't say Nibbana is nothing, can't say the chitta of the Arahant is nothing, but doesn't know how to explain it in time, and causality like that. So maybe it's not so possible to communicate everything, reality and Nibbana, which is unconditioned. I mean, it is said to be ineffable or whatever in many ways. It definitely goes beyond what concepts and speech can communicate. That's in the suttas. So expecting everything to be like logically coherent and articulate is maybe has limitations in itself. And those are some of the academic or scholastic limitations which show up and only seem to get resolved in practice. What they say, they call it pariyatti, patibhati, and pativedi. Even they all know these basic terms, which means study, practice, and fruits of practice. And it's just a guarantee that our understanding evolves and deepens in that way, hopefully, if we actually do the practice. And that's, as they say, you can't eat the menu. So the words only go so far. But we understand the desire to want to be clear about terms or about views or not to be misled or that kind of a thing. So
I'm not familiar with the term chitta.
heart mind. heart mind, chitta, it just means like heart mind, but not just heart mind. But it's the general term for the source of our subjectivity. Okay? So we have a sense of self. Look to see where that's coming from. That's why we keep talking about, like, you know, what is the pure knowing or the pure awareness? That's the pure subjectivity that the sense of self is coming from, or the sense of being that we call it, pure being, free from becoming, just pure being. That's where the sense of self is coming from. That's the pure subjectivity. It's here right now. We're just overlooking it. We haven't learned to recognize it yet. Even the pure loving, like we were saying, the pure love of being itself, that's where our sense of self is coming from. And so some traditions are very explicit about this, and they will be pointing us to recognize this dimension, the source of our subjectivity, right here and now. And that's the chitta. And when it recognizes itself like that, not as the self, or it has the emptiness insight into it, it becomes nibbana, as they say. Do you want to say anything more on that? We went over
Shall
time.
we have meditation?
Well, this is only the first time we've really gone over, so you're pretty good.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
I think it's Ajahn who's doing the meditation. Because I jumped to queue yesterday and did it.
Just a short meditation.
Oh, yes.
Listening to the sound of the bell. Just noticing. Coming near the end of the meditation, if you like, you can bring the intention of sharing the blessing, sharing the merit. There has been any benefit from doing this. May it also be of benefit to all sentient beings. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings incline to Nibbana.
Aham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivade. Swagatu Bhagavata Dhammo Dhamma Namastami. Upatipanno Bhagavato Sangha Sangha